Cristian Romero walked off in tears for Tottenham. Pep Guardiola called Manchester City's clash with Arsenal a final, and suddenly the transfer conversation looks very different. Because when the season tightens, nice theories disappear, and clubs get judged on what they failed to build. Manchester United are trying to lock down Kobbie Mainoo, Newcastle are being linked with Manuel Ugarte, Liverpool are already getting replacement noise around Mohamed Salah, and Chelsea still look like a very expensive argument with no conclusion. The next few minutes matter because the biggest story is not who is being linked, it is who is being exposed. With Just Soccer, and this is one of those football news days where the headlines seem separate until you put them side by side. An injury scare changes Tottenham's priorities, contract movement around Mainoo says plenty about Manchester United's planning, Arsenal are being forced to answer hard questions about depth and joy of all things, and Manchester City are doing what they always do at this stage, turning the title race into a stress test for everyone else. Add in fresh gossip around Ugarte, Liverpool target talk, Van Dijk leaning on ownership, and another brutal critique of Chelsea's mentality, and the pattern becomes obvious. Clubs keep selling confidence, but the pressure is now pulling the truth into the open. We have to start with the moment that felt bigger than one result. Tottenham lost 1-0 to Sunderland, but the image everyone will remember is Cristian Romero leaving in tears. Argentina defender Cristian Romero limps off in tears after Tottenham injury setback. This is where transfer planning stops being abstract and becomes painfully practical. One emotional walk-off can change how a club views January loans, summer center-back priorities, and how much risk it can still tolerate in the back line. The mistake supporters make is waiting for a confirmed timeline before reacting. Squad builders do not wait for certainty. They start running scenarios the second a key defender goes down looking like that. The confirmed part is simple and serious enough on its own. Romero suffered an injury during Tottenham Hotspur's 1-0 Premier League defeat at Sunderland, and he left the field in tears. That image immediately raised doubts about his availability, even though there has been no confirmed injury type and no official recovery timeline attached to it yet. That last point matters because this is exactly where football discussion often turns reckless. Reports can say what happened in the match. They can say the player was emotional, they can say supporters are worried, and Spurs forums clearly are. What they cannot honestly do yet is pretend the diagnosis is known or start handing out return dates like sweets. That is not information, that is panic dressed up as confidence. Even without jumping beyond the facts, the implications are obvious. Tottenham already know that a top-level defense is not built on hope and crossed fingers. If Romero's availability comes into doubt, even temporarily, the conversation around squad depth changes fast. A club can talk all day about style and identity, but if the spine is fragile, the market starts looking less like luxury and more like damage control. Spurs supporters are right to be uneasy because one injury scare at center back can rewrite planning faster than any recruitment presentation ever will. From anxiety over availability to a very different kind of squad protection, Manchester United are trying to secure one of the few things at the club that feels unquestionably worth building around. And that is Kobbie Mainoo. Carrick United in good place on new Mainoo deal. When a club says it is in a good place over a new deal for a young midfielder this important, the real story is not public relations. It is structure. Mainoo is the kind of player who affects transfer planning because keeping him reduces the need to buy solutions his profile already provides. There is also a quiet warning in this. If Champions League football helps persuade players, then missing it does not just hurt revenue, it weakens the club's ability to keep the project credible. Michael Carrick said Manchester United are in a good place regarding a new deal for Kobbie Mainoo, with the agreement getting closer. He also pointed to Champions League football as a factor that could help persuade players to commit. That is not the same as saying the contract is signed, and it definitely is not a green light to invent salary numbers or contract length, because neither has been confirmed here. Still, the direction of travel matters. Mainoo is not just another academy name for sentimental social media posts. He is central to how United want to imagine the next phase of the team. If they secure him on improved terms, it strengthens their midfield planning and gives them more flexibility elsewhere in the market. Clubs spend fortunes trying to buy composure, progression, and personality in central areas. United already have a player who can grow into that role if they do not make life unnecessarily difficult around him. The more interesting part of Carrick's comments is the Champions League reference. That sounds polite, but it carries pressure. Elite players and elite prospects want to believe they are part of something upward. If United get that platform, extending key players becomes easier. If they do not, every negotiation gets heavier, every promise sounds more fragile, and every rival starts circling. So yes, this is a contract story, but it is also a credibility story. At Manchester United, those are never really separate. Now to a story that hits Arsenal from the inside rather than the market. Because when Mikel Arteta says tiredness is not an excuse, he is removing the softest explanation and forcing a harsher conversation. Arteta, tiredness not an excuse for Arsenal amid recent slump. Arteta's line matters because it shifts the debate away from fatigue and toward quality, roles, and emotional sharpness. Once the manager rejects the easiest excuse, people start asking whether the squad is actually complete enough for a title run. The word enjoyment is revealing too. Teams that are fully convinced do not usually need reminding to enjoy themselves. That kind of language often appears when tension has started eating the football. After Arsenal's defeat to Bournemouth, Arteta said tiredness is not an excuse. He also urged his players to rediscover their enjoyment of the game. On the surface, that sounds like standard manager messaging, but the timing gives it more weight because Arsenal are in a period where every drop level gets magnified. What Arteta is doing here is important. He is refusing to let fixture pressure become a catch-all cover story. Managers know that once fatigue becomes the accepted explanation, accountability gets foggy. The press can blame schedules, supporters can blame minutes, and the team can start behaving like the problem is external rather than internal. Arteta is trying to kill that thinking before it spreads. Transfer-wise, this does not confirm any target, and it should not be twisted into that. What it does do is sharpen the logic behind why Arsenal supporters are discussing reinforcement. If tiredness is not the excuse, then maybe the issue is the balance of the squad, the reliability of certain roles, or the lack of freshness in key attacking and defensive moments. That is a much more serious conversation than simple workload management. Arsenal still have quality, but quality under stress gets exposed in very specific ways, and right now the mood around them says supporters can see those fault lines. And if Arsenal wanted a comforting build-up, Pep Guardiola had no interest in providing one. He looked at Manchester City's meeting with Arsenal and called it what he thinks it is, a final. Pep, City's crunch PL clash versus Arsenal is a final. Guardiola calling this a final is not just emotional theater, it is pressure management and psychological framing. He is telling his own players the stakes while also making sure Arsenal feel the full weight of the occasion. The deeper point is brutal for the rest of the league. City often look most dangerous when they simplify everything into one unavoidable mission. Once that machine starts talking like this, everybody else should hear the warning siren. Pep Guardiola described Manchester City's Premier League clash with Arsenal as a final in the title race. He said that after City's 3-0 win against Chelsea, a result that pushed them closer to the leaders and sharpened the importance of the next meeting. There is no confirmed starting lineup hidden in that comment, and it should not be treated like one. What it does give us is an unfiltered sense of urgency from the City camp. Guardiola is too experienced to use language like that carelessly. He knows exactly how a title race can be shaped by framing. If the match is a final, then every duel carries cup final intensity, every tactical decision gets amplified, and every wobble feels fatal. For Arsenal, that means there is no safe emotional distance left. They are being dragged into City's preferred arena where control, nerve, and repetition decide everything. There is also a transfer-adjacent edge here for both clubs. Big games like this change how supporters and executives interpret a squad. If Arsenal falls short, the noise around reinforcement grows louder. If City dominate the occasion, people immediately start talking about how they built yet another machine with almost rude efficiency. That can be annoying if you support anyone else, but annoyance does not make it less true. City have a habit of turning title races into audits of everyone else's construction. From title race certainty to transfer market fog, we need to treat the next one with the correct amount of skepticism, because not every rumor deserves a dramatic soundtrack and a giant thumbnail face suit. Newcastle want Man United's Ugarte, Monday's gossip. This is exactly the kind of story that can be useful without being reliable in the strongest sense. It tells you where the market conversation may be forming, but it does not give you permission to behave as if a bid has landed on somebody's desk. For Manchester United, even the existence of this rumor is interesting. It suggests their midfield picture remains fluid enough that exits and retentions are still open to negotiation depending on the wider summer plan. BBC presented the claim that Newcastle United want Manchester United's Manuel Ugarte as part of Monday's gossip. That framing matters. Gossip is not confirmation, and there is no verified bid amount, no official offer, and no personal terms agreement in the information provided. So this belongs in the category of market watch, not market conclusion. Even so, it touches a live issue for both clubs. Newcastle's midfield needs have been discussed repeatedly, and Ugarte is the kind of name that naturally triggers a reaction because he represents steel, work rate, and control in the middle of the pitch. For United, the response among supporters is divided, which makes complete sense. Some see him as important depth or even more than that. Others would consider a sale if a major offer appeared and helped fund broader changes. The truth is that rumors like this often function as weather reports more than transfer documents. They tell you which directions clubs may be looking, which names are circulating, and where uncertainty still exists. If Newcastle are genuinely interested, that would have implications for United's midfield construction. But right now, the adult reading is simple. Watch it, do not marry it. Football gossip can move quickly, but it also loves wearing confidence it has not earned. Elsewhere, the live transfer conveyor belt is doing what it always does, throwing multiple clubs into one moving headline and daring everyone to mistake motion for certainty. That brings us to Liverpool, Arsenal, and a classic two-thread rumor package. Transfer news live. Liverpool targets Salah replacement as Arsenal join Mingueza battle Tim transfer mark. The important part here is not whether every live roundup link becomes real. It is what the themes say about club priorities. Liverpool being tied to a Salah replacement search tells you succession planning is now impossible to ignore, while Arsenal being linked to Mingueza-related competition fits the broader anxiety around squad depth and role coverage. This is also where modern transfer coverage gets slippery. Combining several developing rumors in one feed creates heat, but heat is not the same as verified progress. Supporters should read the direction of interest, not pretend the paperwork is already on the table. Transfermarkt's live roundup linked Liverpool with a search for a replacement for Mohamed Salah, and also said Arsenal are involved in a battle concerning Mingueza. Presented exactly as that, this is ongoing transfer news rather than a finished deal in either case. There are no confirmed terms, no agreed fees, and no reason to start acting as though either move is imminent. For Liverpool, the Salah angle is the one that naturally grabs attention because replacing that output, that gravity, and that reliability is one of the ugliest jobs in football recruitment. You do not just swap in another famous winger and call it succession planning. If there is serious internal thinking around a replacement profile, that would reflect a club trying to avoid being caught late rather than one casually browsing names. That is sensible, because waiting too long on icons is how clubs end up acting shocked by mathematics they have ignored for years. On Arsenal's side, the Mingueza competition line is interesting because it sits neatly with the current mood around the squad. Supporters already see stress points. When a team is fighting on multiple fronts and the manager is publicly rejecting fatigue as an excuse, any report about defensive or structural reinforcement suddenly feels more believable emotionally, even if the move itself remains unconfirmed. So this story is less about certainty and more about signal. Liverpool and Arsenal both look like clubs aware that next season's problems cannot be solved by pretending this season's cracks were temporary. One quick but important note before we close the loop on the transfer chatter: sometimes the smartest thing in football news is knowing when not to pretend you have enough to build on. Transfer rumors news. Arsenal Man City must act fast for Tonali. ESPN. This headline exists in the wider rumor stream, but in the story package provided here, it is explicitly rejected because there is missing verified current club context for Tonali in the available pool. That means treating it as a serious developed item would be sloppy. So rather than manufacture certainty, the honest reading is simple. Reports suggest Arsenal and Manchester City are being discussed in connection with Tonali, but without the necessary verified context in this package, it does not meet the standard to push further. And football news would be a lot less ridiculous if more people were comfortable saying exactly that. Staying with Liverpool, not every important story comes through a transfer tunnel. Sometimes the pressure point is governance, and when the captain starts leaning on ownership, people should probably stop pretending that off-pitch tension is irrelevant.
Virgil van Dijk, Liverpool captain, urges owners to resolve ticket price dispute.
Paper talk and football transfer gossip. Sky Sports.
This is not a transfer update, but it still matters because club atmosphere is part of club power. When a senior figure like Virgil van Dijk is publicly urging owners to resolve a dispute, it signals that leadership inside the dressing room understands the reputational cost of disconnect between supporters and the board. Fans are right to ask whether this distracts from recruitment. The answer is not always direct, but governance noise has a way of bleeding into everything. Stable clubs can negotiate from strength. Fractured clubs negotiate while explaining themselves. Sky Sports, in its paper talk and football transfer gossip coverage, reported that Virgil van Dijk urged Liverpool's owners to resolve a ticket price dispute. The key thing here is framing. This is being presented as pressure on club decision-making rather than proof that any specific transfer is effective. There is also no basis here to claim the dispute has been settled, because that has not been confirmed. Still, Van Dijk stepping into that conversation is significant. Captains do not usually choose these moments by accident. When a player of his standing speaks on an issue like this, it reflects an understanding that supporter relations are not background noise to be ignored until the next match kicks off. Liverpool, like every major club, sells belonging as much as football. Ticket disputes can cut directly into that identity. The transfer-adjacent relevance is indirect but real. Clubs love acting as if football operations and supporter politics exist in separate rooms. They do not. Perception matters. Stability matters. A healthy relationship between owners, supporters, and senior players creates a stronger environment for everything else, including squad building. No, this does not automatically change a deal, but it does tell you something about where pressure is currently sitting at Liverpool, and that is worth hearing. And now to Chelsea, where the talent argument keeps colliding with the same ugly question. What if the problem is not just who they have, but how they respond when the match starts going against them? Rosenior points to mentality issue after Chelsea outclassed by Man City. Liam Rosenier's criticism lands because it attacks the most expensive illusion in football, the idea that enough talent automatically creates a serious team. It does not. Not if the reaction to adversity is weak, disjointed, or emotionally soft. This is also why Chelsea transfer talk always risks becoming a distraction. Buying more names is the easiest answer to sell. Building resilience, hierarchy, and tactical trust is harder, less glamorous, and probably more urgent. After Chelsea were beaten 3-0 at home by Manchester City at Stamford Bridge, Liam Rosenior pointed to a mentality issue. His argument was that Chelsea have a resilience problem, particularly in how they react to setbacks, and that weakness is damaging their hopes of finishing in the top 5. It is a sharp criticism, but the result certainly gave it oxygen. This matters because it cuts against the lazy script that every Chelsea problem can be solved by adding another expensive player to the pile. At some stage, the conversation has to move from shopping list to structure. A team can be loaded with ability and still collapse emotionally, lose shape after one bad spell, or play like 11 separate debates instead of one coordinated idea. That is what mentality criticism really points at, not just courage, but coherence. Chelsea supporters are already arguing over whether the squad needs a wholesale reset, and you can understand why. But resets are not magic. They are only useful if the club correctly diagnoses what is broken. If Rosenior is right, then this is bigger than personnel alone. It becomes a question of standards, leadership, and whether the football has enough internal logic to survive a punch in the mouth. Right now, too often, Chelsea get hit once and start looking like a very expensive group project no one fully planned. That is the real shape of the day on Just Soccer. Tottenham are staring at what one Romero injury scare could do to their planning. Manchester United are trying to secure Mainoo before leverage shifts. Arsenal are being forced to answer whether fatigue was ever the true problem. City are treating the title race like knockout football. Liverpool are juggling succession noise and supporter tension. Newcastle and Ugarte remain a rumor worth watching rather than worshipping. And Chelsea are still discovering that money cannot buy mentality on demand. In other words, the market is moving, but the pressure is telling the truer story.